Greetings once again, my fellow Star Trek fans. I got another little geeking out video for you today that's going to be a lot of fun. Now, I recently showed you the communicator, the standard issue Starfleet communicator, and that was a lot of fun. So what I'm going to show you today is we're going to go over the standard issue Type 1 and Type 2 hand phaser from Starfleet. This is, of course, from Star Trek, the original series. And for reference, we're going to be using the Starfleet Technical Manual, which is a great book. If you guys have a chance to pick that up, you've got to. And the Star Trek, The History of the Enterprise and the Enterprise A Illustrated Handbook. This book is really good. It's interesting. It's got a lot of facts, but it's not as technical as, obviously, the Technical Manual. Okay, so let's get started. Let me put you guys on a tripod so I can show you guys the Type 1 hand phaser. Okay, I think first what I'm going to show you guys, we'll do the Type 1 first. Let's take the phaser off. This is the phaser from the Wand Company, and right now it's the Type 2 hand phaser. So I'm going to show you how to get it to the Type 1. It's got a button on the side. You push it up. It releases, and don't just yank it up. You pick it up and you pull it out because you can see the little, it's kind of like a little lip that goes inside of there. Anyway, we're going to put that aside for now. And let me show you guys the Type 1 hand phaser. Just put it on.
FX mode.
We'll keep it in FX mode. And this one from the Wand Company, the trigger is underneath. So I'm going to put it on stun, guys, not kill, but I want to show you the beam. Okay. So let's take a look at the Type 1 hand phaser. Love it. Now, the Type 1 hand phaser, you can see, I like it because it shows you the range, the effectiveness, and the ranges in meters. Now, the Type 1 is not as powerful as Type 2. If you guys remember, when the miners were battling the Horta, they had a Type 1 hand phaser, and it wasn't enough to stop the Horta. Ultimately, they didn't need phasers anymore, which was a really good thing, but the starships, all the people have Type 2 standard issue. But for Type 1, you can see the effective ranges. The overload blast radius, and this is in meters, 40 meters, dematerialize in 10 meters, disrupt 20 meters, heat in 2 meters, and stun 30 meters. Now these can be set to a low setting to just kind of heat things up. You guys remember Mr. Sulu, when he had to keep heating up the rocks to survive, because every time they beamed something down, it would duplicate and it wouldn't work. And it shows you the front view. You got the faceplate. Looking at the main part, you can see this part right here. When it's a Type 2, it goes up, but in a Type 1, it stays down. And that is actually called the electron aspirator pile. So if anyone asks you, hey man, you know what this is? You can say yes. Why, that happens to be the electron aspirator pile for the Type 1 hand phaser. And you can see the force setting wheel. Now, of course, when this is in Type 2 mode, when you rotate the wheel, this goes up. Excuse me, the electron aspirator pile goes up, but I don't know if that's what it's called for the Type 2. And it says the operational light. Now, I'm trying to remember on the Star Trek, the original series, when they used the Type 1, if I've ever seen a light on it, and I don't remember. And this is from the Wand Company, and there's no light there. There's no light on the Diamond Select either, but according to this, there should be a light. Looking at the side view, we have the deflector shield, And that's this part. That goes all the way around. Well, on both sides anyway. And we have the body shell. And the access plate would be from underneath. Just like the communicator. Oh, you gotta be careful you don't. I just took out half the building. Okay. And on the bottom, just like the communicator, it has the magnetomic adhesion area, which is that area that probably affixes it to the utility belt. You can see it's got a screw. You can see on the wand company, it's got the contacts. And what that does, I did it again. It goes to the contacts in the Type 2, and it powers the unit. This in itself has no power. It's actually powered by this. This is what gets charged. But we'll see if it's got its own independent power supply other than the Type 1. You can see the center line profile. Warning, discard any unit showing any dimensional change. You think having a gun misfire would be bad. You'd have a really bad day if your Type 1 hand phaser ended up blowing up. DIM, WOA 49.40 millimeters, DOA 27.00 millimeters, LOA is at 107.20 millimeters. You can see the very front is 1.02 MeV photon emitter. So again, if anyone goes, hey man, you know what that is on a Type 1 hand phaser? You can say, sure, it's 1.02 MeV photon emitter. And let's see, does that cover everything on this page? Looks like it does. All right. So that's everything in the technical manual on the Type 1 hand phaser. So now we're going to go to the handbook, the illustrated handbook of the history of the Enterprise and the Enterprise A. And again, this one doesn't have as much technical material. It does have the illustrations. You can see the trigger, which is on top. The power indicator, the power control. Did we see where the trigger was on the technical manual? I mean, it's a pretty important function, right? to know what a trigger is. Yes, I'm sorry, I neglected to show you guys. This is the trigger. Right below the electron aspirator pile is the trigger. So that would be this. And we do see that on the show. But for purposes of the functionality of the Type 2, the wand company has it on the bottom. And I think the Diamond Select does as well. I've shown you guys the Diamond Select one, but I just wanted to show you guys, I'm sorry, I forgot to show you the trigger. That's pretty important to know where the trigger is, especially if you're under attack by Romulans. Okay, going back to the illustrated handbook. Okay, we got the trigger, the power indicator, power control, and that's for the Type 1. The Type 1 phaser could be used independently of the Type 2 unit, but it was less powerful than the larger counterpart. Again, that's basically it over there for the Type 1. You can see the side view, the power indicator, Type 1 phaser. And on the bottom, it shows the top, the trigger. It doesn't say anything about that section. 2-in-1 design. The Type 1 phaser fitted precisely into the slot of the upper part of the Type 2, creating a single unit more recognizable as a weapon. At the front end of the Type 2 was the pre-fire chamber and emitter, where the phaser's variable energy beam was discharged. It was engaged by depressing a trigger on top of the Type 2 pistol's grip, which housed the weapon's power pack. This pack could be easily ejected and exchanging when power pack cells were depleted. enabling user to quickly reload the phaser. Okay, so according to Starfleet, this is the power pack. And I think we all knew that, but I just wanted to confirm it. The Type 1 has its own power supply on its own, and it's magnified through the power supply of the Type 2. And that's basically it for the specifics of the Type 1 hand phaser. Yep. All right, so let me show you guys the Type 2. All right, so let me put the Type 2 phaser together for you. We're going to use the Type 1. And just like I showed you when we disassembled it, this little raised area, or this little lip, fits right into there. And then you don't just force it in, you push the button, and then you can see it kind of, when you hear the click, it's locked into place.
FX mode.
And it's in the FX mode. So this is in stun. So I'm just going to stun you guys. Isn't that cool? But I like it. Let's see. This is my favorite one. This is not stun, but I love the effect. So when you put yours in and it's not working, the Type 1 is still the one that's working, try putting it off. Once it's off, put it into the Type 2 body and then put it on, and it should be all set. I'm going to show you guys the dilithium chamber. If you guys have never seen the dilithium chamber on a Type 2 hand phaser before, you're in for a treat. Check it out. Love it. Okay, so let's go over the parts. We'll start with the Starfleet technical manual. You can see the Type 2 phaser has the Type 1 phaser that's locked in on the top part of it. And the Type 2 is much more powerful. The effects ranges in meters, overload blast radius of 135 meters, dematerialize 30 meters, disrupt 60 meters, heat 6 meters, and stun 90 meters. Now that's a lot more than the Type 1. Dimensions, the LOA, 22, let me see. Is that 221.00 millimeters? That's what it looks like. WOA 49.40 millimeters. DOA 157.50 millimeters. You could see some of the parts. Let's start with what I just showed you. You've got the dilithium crystal cell. And that was so cool. I mean, we got to look at it again. And I'll keep the cover off. Of course, you wouldn't keep the cover off of your hand phaser because, you know, a lot of dangerous stuff could come from that being off. Isn't that beautiful? Let me show you guys what it looked like on stun. Beautiful. I hope the camera can pick it up on how pretty it looks. If that looks pretty, can you imagine what it looks like inside engineering in the dilithium chamber? Okay. So let's take a look at the front. Now, with the piece that's all the way in the front is the beam shield. Now, it's not the beam emitter. There are two pieces, stops, at the top of the cone. So the cone that you see inside is actually the beam emitter. And it's the beam shield that is that clear part that's around it. So remember, the part that surrounds it is the beam shield, and the cone inside is the beam emitter. And this, that's adjustable, this part is the photon accelerator. What this does on a wand company is, the way I got it set right now, is as long as you pull the trigger, it stays lit. But if you adjust this, it actually adjusts the time that that's lit. It'll shut it off on its own, and I like it lit. Okay, what's next? We got the forward lock plate, which would be this right here. Obviously, we have the rear lock plate, and that's where on the wand company, it has the button. I wonder if that is the button. Let me show you guys. In almost the exact place on the Starfleet technical manual that looks like a button right there. I'm wondering if that's the same thing when you push it in and it unlocks, because you can't have it just ripping the phaser out of the Type 2. But there's nothing, it doesn't say anything about that. So we'll see if the other book says something. Okay, so I showed you the front. We got the dilithium crystal cell, the beam shield, the beam emitter, the photon accelerator, the forward lock plate. We've got the deflector shield. Just like on a Type 1, it was on the side. And this is on the side. We got the Type 1 hand phaser that's locked inside. It's locked on, which is required. And the rear lock plate. Okay, going back, we've got the force setting dial. And I had shown you guys a little bit, like if we're going to put to stun. And let's see, what is that? I think that's 7. So I got it on force 7, which is stun. And what's force 8, I believe, is also stun. Well, maybe not. So that crew member's dead. But this one is my favorite. I like force setting number 5. I like the sound and I like the colors that come out of the emitter. Can you imagine if you had a real hand phaser? If you're sitting waiting in traffic and you got a real hand phaser and you can just, all right, no, forget that. Forget I said that. Okay, so let's look at the top. You can see the top of the unit. Basically, I had shown you the beam shield, the beam emitter, photon accelerator. This is the forward lock plate. We've got the Type 1 hand phaser inside. We've got the rear lock plate. Oh, okay. Check it out, guys. That's the lock release. So just like the wand company, and I think the Diamond Select has that too over there. So that is accurate to the Starfleet technical manual, because that's the release button. Okay, let's see what else. It's got the deflector shield that also continues on to the back, but for some reason, this part of the deflector shield isn't a different color, but this is. And that's interesting, because I always thought when I was a kid that this was some kind of heat discharge unit, kind of like to dissipate the heat from the weapon, but it's the same thing as what this is, which is the deflector shield. So it's just a little more prominent on the back. Okay, let's see. We get into, okay, so we've got another page on the Type 2 hand phaser. You can see the lock plate recess. Recess to match the faceplate of hand phaser type 1. You got the free position, forward lock plate, and the rear lock plate detail. You can see the scale in millimeters. You guys can see the schematic. Well, no, not the schematic. This is actually the sizing. I was really hoping that I'd have a schematic to show you guys, just like the communicator, but I don't. So far, we don't have one. And it's actually the handle that gets replaced for the power, the fresh power pack. The lines and the sections. You can see the bottom, the grip attachment to the body. And that kind of locks into place. And the switches, this is interesting because I didn't know. This Type 2 phaser has 2 switches. We've got the safety, which is on top. You put that on, obviously, everyone knows what a safety is. And then the interlocking switch, the trigger is on the bottom. So that's a good idea. As far as I know, there's been no company that's made it that way. Diamond Select, the Wand Company, they all have this kind of push phaser button. I'm trying to remember on the model kit I had when I was a kid of the tricorder phaser and a communicator, if that had this kind of a setup with 2. I have to look into that. I'll put it up on a screen because I actually don't have that yet. And again, on the bottom, it says, warning, discard any unit showing any dimensional change. So that's what the technical manual shows for the Type 2 standard issue hand phaser. And then that's the ray gun. That's a whole different video. So let's go ahead and see what this one has to say about the Type 2 hand phaser. You can see the pictures. It's got the beam emitter, pre-fire chamber, the trigger. Oh, I was talking about Mr. Sulu, and here he is. Mr. Sulu used a Type 2 phaser set to a low power beam to heat solid rock during a freezing night on planet Alpha 177. Increased power. The Type 2 base unit amplified the power of the smaller Type 1 phaser, which slotted neatly into a compartment on the top. As with all phasers of the period, it had a number of settings, including heat, stun, and kill. You can see the nicer depiction of the Type 2 phaser pistol. You got the beam emitter in the front, power indicator on the top, the Type 1 phaser, the power control button, pre-fire chamber, the trigger, the grip, or the power pack. And looking at it head on, a Type 1, and you can see the emitter, the power pack. And the Type 2 phaser consisted of a pistol-shaped base which contained additional power cells and controls. The Type 1 phaser snapped into the top of the unit. Type 2 phaser was normally carried on an equipment belt and was not usually issued on diplomatic or sensitive missions. The pistol grip and simple controls made it an effective weapon that could be adjusted and fired at short notice. You can see the small Type 1 phaser could be carried less conspicuously in its counterpart, the large Type 2 phaser. And there's just not enough of the picture to see what that episode could be. Despite Starfleet's avowed mission to explore the galaxy in peace, ensuring the safety of its personnel was paramount, and the need for defensive weaponry was clear, because you're not always going to have a race that's friendly, as we find out in the series. Phaser pistols were an evolution of the earlier phase pistol, a phase-modulated energy weapon used by Starfleet crews during the 22nd century. By 2260, And above, the Type 2 phaser had become standard issue aboard all Starfleet vessels. It fired a focused energy beam, which could be adjusted to a variety of strengths, which range from a stun setting to full disintegration. The handheld weapon was in fact a combination of two components. The smaller palm-sized Type 1 phaser was a weapon in itself, albeit relatively low-powered when compared to its larger sibling. With 8 separate power settings, when used independently, its minuscule size gave the advantage of discretion. And the phaser was most often used during diplomatic missions where a more obvious weapon could have been wholly inappropriate. When combined with a larger Type 2 pistol component, however, the phaser became an altogether more versatile tool, with increased power settings and capable of several different applications. And I showed you guys the power control button on the bottom. You can see a picture. I think that's Dr. McCoy when the Salt Vampire was attacking Captain Kirk. Phaser pistols emitted a concentrated beam of energy, the power of which had multiple settings. And it shows you a nice picture of the phaser. The power settings of the phaser could be adjusted by turning a selector dial placed towards the rear of the Type 2 unit. Another power control wheel was located on the upper face of the Type 1 phaser, which sat beside a power indicator readout. A crew member could thereby select a precise power level at will, whether they were using the full Type 2 combination or the detachable Type 1 phaser with settings generated a heat ray, a stun beam, or on a selected of a more destructive mode. While phasers were used primarily as defensive weapons usually set to stun, they were capable of firing with lethal force and could be set to kill in the order of a senior officer. However, the wide range of settings also allowed for other uses, which included using the phaser as an emergency source of energy capable of engaging the launch systems of a shuttlecraft like the Galileo. You guys remember, Mr. Spock's first command was the Galileo in the episode The Galileo 7, and they used the phasers to help power the engines or the batteries. Or being used as a cutting beam capable of slicing through thick metal. If set to overload, a phaser even had the capacity to be used as an explosive device with enough power to cause serious damage to a starship. Of course, putting it on overload could be a big problem. And that looks like is there another page? Nope, that's everything that's in this book when it comes to the Type 1 and the Type 2 phaser. So what I'm discovering so far is I do like this book. But this book has more of like a descriptive narration. And this book has more of the technical narration. And if I was going to have to go without one, obviously, I don't want to go without the Starfleet Technical Manual. This book is awesome. Like I said, if you guys get a chance to get this book and check it out, you're going to love it. I mean, you're really going to be able to geek out. And don't get me wrong, I absolutely love this book as well. Like I said, I'm going to be doing a project on a video with the history of the USS Enterprise. I've done videos on the history of many things, whether it's the Titanic, the Lusitania. Actually, I haven't done the Lusitania. That one is in the works. I've done the Titanic, the Mauritania. I've done the Calypso from Jacques Cousteau. I've done Jacques Cousteau's PBY and a lot of things, but I'm going to be doing one on the starship USS Enterprise coming up. Also, what I'd like to do is when I get the tricorder from the Wand Company, as of now, it's not out yet. I would like to do another video on the tricorder. So what I'm thinking is we've got the medical tricorder, the science tricorder, and the geological tricorder. So depending on what the one from the Wand Company is, I'm thinking that it's going to be a science tricorder like Mr. Spock's. So what I might do is I might go through the technical manual with you guys and do Dr. McCoy's medical tricorder. I think that would be a really interesting video too. and show you guys all the components of the medical tricorder. But my friends, this was for the phaser. And I hope you learned some things about the hand phaser from Star Trek, the original series. I hope you had as much fun watching as I did making the video. And until my next video, my friends, live long and prosper, and I'll see you soon.